Hello and welcome back to my channel, Boozy Bookish Thoughts. I'm Justine, or Jay if you prefer, and welcome to my new video. So this video is going up on February 24. That's obviously the day before February 25. We know how dates work, but here in the Philippines, February 25 is a significant date because, oh, I'm so sorry about the noise. But February 25, 1986 was when the Filipino citizens peacefully overthrew the Marcos dictatorship, and it's just a significant day in the Philippines when we commemorate how civil society and how people from all walks of life came together and stood up against authoritarianism and against human rights abuses and against injustice in general. So it was a landmark moment in our history, and in honor of that, I want to celebrate that a little bit on my channel since I am Filipino. I decided to do books, if you'll have guessed from the title of the series, books to topple a dictatorship, or otherwise banned books recommendations. So these are some banned books that I have read and that I really enjoyed, and that I think are valuable for us to read and for us to talk about a little bit more and a little bit more deeply. Yeah, so let's jump right in. So there are 4 book recommendations. 4 are international book. 1 is a Filipino book. I will admit that the Filipino book I've not completed reading, but that's because it's really heavy, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. So we'll start with possibly the most famous banned book of all, George Orwell's 1984. Classic, very classic. Now, there's even a meme about how this book has been banned both by the US and by the USSR, one for being anti-capitalist and the other for being anti-socialist. And the meme's a little reductive, but it's also not totally inaccurate. So 1984 is sort of political satire, but you can also just call it straight up dystopian science fiction, and it takes place in a totalitarian state. And totalitarianism is when the government controls every aspect of a citizen's life, and that includes even their thoughts and, to an extent, their feelings, like, because thoughts and feelings are connected. So that's the essence of totalitarianism. So the authoritarian state in the book is modeled after Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany. So Orwell was a democratic socialist according to sources, but he, as evidenced by his other work, the famous work Animal Farm, he strongly disapproved of, or not disapproved, but he had strong criticism against the Russian Revolution and against Stalin's dictatorship in particular. The themes of this book include, obviously, totalitarianism, which it critiques totalitarianism, which is like the extreme end of authoritarianism. It takes the problematique of totalitarianism and takes it to its logical conclusion. It also has themes on mass surveillance, without which an authoritarian state cannot survive. It also includes themes on censorship, which is, again, a classic characteristic of authoritarian states. Nationalism, which again is commonly found with authoritarianism, and of course poverty and inequality. Now, if you will see the running theme here, it's not a so it's more about authoritarianism than about critiquing socialism or capitalism, because realistically authoritarianism can and has happened across the economic spectrum. And while this book has been banned and challenged by people from both the left and the right, ultimately it is critiquing the extreme ending, the extreme logical ending of authoritarian governments, and what that looks like for the regular people, what it means for citizens who live under that kind of rule. It's an excellent book. It's pretty disturbing. It does come with some pretty hard trigger warnings. I will probably not be able to cover all, so I suggest you check out the Storygraph page for the full list of trigger warnings, or I think there's another website for trigger warnings. I think it's called Did the Dog Die? Something like that. So, warning, be responsible if you're reading this for the first time. The next book that I want to talk about is Gregory Maguire's Wicked, which most of us know. I just did the Broadway book tag last Tuesday, so most of us know this from the musical, but I don't know if a lot of people know it's based on a book, and honestly, the book is way better. Not as much show tunes, not as much dance sequences, but a lot deeper and a lot more meaningful. So this was challenged mostly for the sexual content, which I will kind of say fair, but it was eventually retained and not and was allowed to be shelved and read by, I think it was a school district, which is also like fair. I mean, you know, I'm a little surprised that it's never been challenged for its social commentary, but the book kind of takes a look at what it means to be evil from the point of view of someone who is being called evil by society. Now, it deals with heavy and not so subtly with questions about power and politics, the problems of propaganda, and how labeling something or someone as a terrorist or as a terroristic act works, and how that works for society or works for the people who are in power. This book is really deep. The musical kind of glosses over the political themes, but it's definitely going to inspire you to like stand up to your local overlord. It has heavy questions on like what it means to be called a terrorist, what it means to be called evil, and why certain people are called that by the wide majority of society, and if that is really valid or warranted. So very interesting book, very interesting critique, social critique. I highly recommend for people who are looking to inspire revolt. Anyway, next is Lois Lowry's The Giver. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, Lowry or Lowry. I pronounce it Lowry, so Lois Lowry, The Giver. This is a young adult novel, even kind of middle grade if you ask me in terms of the writing, but it has been criticized for not being entirely original or groundbreaking, which is again not entirely unfair. However, it has also been the subject of bans or attempted bans for dark themes and violence, which isn't exactly politics, but the dark themes kind of is a broad term, and there is some people who read it as like a conservative book because of the use of Christian imagery, particularly a Christmas scene in a key point in the book. But there are also other critics who say that it depends on your reading and it can be transgressive and, you know, all that other fun stuff. I'm including it in this list because there's it's popular and it's easy to read. It's very accessible to young readers. Lots of people encounter this early on in their life. There's even a movie, which I hear isn't great, but there is a movie and that might lead people into reading the book. And personally, I had a very good encounter with this when I was I read this in late grade school, and I really enjoyed it, and I found it very mind-blowing. Not quite mind-blowing, but it helped develop my critical thinking, definitely. It helped inspire a little bit more critical thinking in me. So, one of the most important themes in The Giver is the importance of like institutional or cultural memory, the way that we as a society remember significant events in our social or collective lives, which helped shape us into what we are today. So it also has themes on eugenics, which is always dark and problematic, and just themes on what it means to live in, or what it means to learn that what you took for granted in society is not always how it has been. So I just really like this book as a young reader, and I think it gives young readers, or I hope it gives young readers, or even older readers, that little spark of critical thinking that will start them thinking that maybe how it's always been done is not actually how it's always been done. That maybe there's reasons why things are the way they are, and maybe those reasons could be improved upon or have changed, and so that we need to update how we do things. It's a simplistic, straight up dystopia, but it is very subtle. It's pretty subtle, and it was a good read. I enjoyed it as a young reader, and I just want to recommend it. And it falls under banned books, and it definitely will inspire people to be a little bit more critical of society. And so that's one of the banned book recommendations. Now, moving on. So all of these books that I've discussed have been banned in various countries, but most of the banned book lists you will find online focus primarily on the US. So now I want to talk about a book that has been banned here in the Philippines for at least a specific period of time for reasons that will become clear eventually. So that book is The Conjugal Dictatorship of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos by Primitivo Mijares. This is a memorial / expose of the authoritarian regime of President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. alongside his wife, the First Lady Imelda Marcos. The author, Primitivo Mijares, was originally a propagandist who was on the side of the Marcoses. He even wrote articles on the necessity of martial law, including following several key terrorist acts, which are the quotes are justified if you understand Philippine history. And then once martial law was declared, he became a fairly high-ranking member in the regime and was even in charge of the government office which managed press censorship. And it's documented that he had a personal relationship with Ferdinand Marcos Sr. However, several years after the declaration of martial law, he claimed to have become disgusted with the corruption, with the blatant cronyism and all that, and he defected. He fled to the United States, he wrote a letter of defection, and he started campaigning against the Marcoses. Now, to be completely transparent, there are some who say that he was not being genuine, that he was just being an opportunist and just wanted to like play the political game. There's even some evidence that he supposedly extorted money from Marcos while in the US and campaigning against him. So my thoughts on that are that, one, considering everything else we will talk about here, and considering how his family was affected by his defection, I think they paid the price, and I think it's kind of moot to question his sincerity at this point. Number two, about the extortion money, it's hard to say. I've only read that on one source, and there are plenty of people who are still supporting the Marcoses at this point. So for all I know, that could be propaganda. I just wanted to be completely transparent about what I talk about in this channel. So, it's and besides, this was a really complicated time in Philippine history, all joking aside. Not that I was joking, but the point is that Primitivo Mijares was in the US and he was campaigning against the Marcos dictatorship. He was speaking at US Congress, US Senate, things like that. And eventually he started writing this book and he published it eventually. And it was his personal account of the dealings of the Marcos regime. It was and still is considered to be one of the most accurate depictions of that time in our government's history, because it was a first-hand account written by such a well-placed insider. So it's very unique in that way. And not long after this book was published, Primitivo Mijares disappeared after boarding a flight from Guam to the Philippines. So he was supposed to return to the Philippines and he disappeared. No trace of him has ever been found. He is not unique in this. Thousands of people were disappeared during this time in our history, and like I said, many of them have never been found as well. He is, however, like I said, kind of unique because he was high profile and he was a writer who had just published this expose. So his case is just a little bit more well known. Sadly, that wasn't the end of the retribution, and I will say slight trigger warning at this point. Skip ahead about a minute or two if you don't want to hear some pretty sad stuff. But a few months after Primitivo disappeared, his youngest son, Boyet Mijares, was lured out of the family home by state security forces and subsequently kidnapped, tortured, and killed. His mutilated body was found in an open field like sometime later, and security forces even lied to his mother while they were searching for him. So those are the heavy consequences that I talked about their family dealing with following his defection. So for obvious reasons, this book was banned in the Philippines during martial law, and it was very dangerous to own a copy. It was very dangerous to be seen reading it. I mean, you couldn't. It was it was a dangerous time in general, but it was particularly dangerous if you were seen reading this book. So in 1986, President Marcos was ousted. He and his family fled to the US, and democracy was restored with a new constitution a year later. Obviously, things have not improved as much as we would have liked, but since the fall of the dictatorship in 1986, the family of Marcos Sr. Marcos Sr. himself has died in the early 90s, but his family, Imelda, Amy, and Ferdinand Marcos Jr., have inched their way back into the public sphere, starting with local positions in their region, moving into senatorial positions, and now culminating in the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. He is currently president, and following their return to power, the family of Primitivo Mijares has relaunched the book with annotated and revised edition, and most importantly, they have released it for free as an ebook on a university's website. So it is free to access. This is part of the effort to institutionalize memory and to ensure that the history of that time is not erased. I will include a link to the ebook in the description. I'm not profiting from this. That's not an affiliate link. It's completely free. I make no profit from this. And this is a book that I said I have not finished reading. I have started reading it, but it's a very heavy book, and it's especially for someone whose family was personally affected by the violence of this time. It's disturbing to read. So obviously all the trigger warnings as well, especially considering, again, the violence that this book has wrought on the author's family. So all of the themes that we've talked about today, such as authoritarianism, the logical conclusions of authoritarianism, such as mass surveillance, censorship, and all that, related with propaganda, the use of propaganda by dictatorships, the use of calling certain groups evil and terrorist, as well as the lack of institutional memory, all play into where the Philippines is today. And we need to work on these things. We need to ensure at this point that no more history is lost. And part of that effort is the free availability of this book. I hope you give it a look, check it out. Like I said, it is free, and it's not just like a sample, it's the entire book. I will leave a link for that down below. If you are interested in the history of the EDSA revolt, which is what culminated in February 25, 1986, I will leave a link for the history of that in the description as well. If you would like a short history of protest movements in the Philippines in general, I have written something for my full-time job, and I will include a link for that as well. It traces the history of protests from colonial period all the way up until the 2020s, so you can check that out. This has probably been my most political and will probably be my most controversial video, but I really felt strongly about this, and I wanted to talk about these books and why these books were banned, and why it is important to read books that have been banned. So I was drinking coffee. I didn't even take a sip this entire time, but I have coffee. Again, this is in product placement, but cheers. Cheers to freedom.